Hello, my name is Brier Stucky, and today I will be giving a presentation over my research proposal, which is a phenomenological study on near-death experiences. Let me go ahead and share my PowerPoint with you so you're able to follow along. And here we go. Okay, so as I said, this is a phenomenological study, meaning that we are focusing on words and meanings and contexts. That's qualitative study. And so the whole goal of it, as I'll get into here in a little bit, but just to give you an overview, is to examine the language of near-death experiences, and not so much the experience, but the after effects, and specifically focused on religious and spiritual beliefs. But before we do that, it's helpful to kind of get our bearings here with what we're talking about. So near-death experience, it's kind of a little bit self-explanatory, but it's an experience where someone is near death, and it's usually described in like spiritual, transcendent ways. People describe them as insightful, life-changing, transformative experiences, and a lot of times that results in significant life changes. Here are some common elements. We'll go into these in a little bit more detail here in a second. But things like a sense of ineffability, which means difficulty in explaining what's going on because you're describing something transcendent, out of the norm. Feelings of peace, seeing a dark tunnel, an out-of-body experience, encountering a being of light, panoramic life review. This would sort of be when people say like their life flashes before their eyes, that sort of thing is often described. And hyperlucidity, meaning that one is able to use their brain power in a way that they've never really experienced as they are alive. So in general, like the problem that this study is trying to correct and sort of fill in the gaps, a lot of studies on near-death experiences focus on the way people's lives change for the better. There have been more specific studies tailored to near-death experiences, or NDEs, as I'll probably start calling them, on afterlife and religious beliefs. And there have been phenomenological studies conducted to analyze the language of the actual NDE itself. But what I wanted to do in this particular project was to analyze the language that people use to describe their religious and spiritual beliefs after the NDE, and I'll kind of get into that rationale a little bit more. So here, and so the purpose of the study is to thematically analyze the ways in which those who have NDEs explain their religious and spiritual beliefs after the experience. We will be using a qualitative phenomenological approach and using that to analyze the language of these individuals in order to discern themes and patterns of post-NDE religious belief. And real quick, before we jump into a little bit of literature review and overview of that, sort of the rationale behind this is, one, just a general interest of mine in these near-death experiences and in religious belief in general. And I've been noticing in the research that I've been doing that there's sort of a shift oftentimes where people have the near-death experience, and then rather than going back into either traditional religious beliefs, they sort of adopt a more general, vague spirituality that is not really tailored to a specific religious tradition. So that's kind of what the study is focused on, like giving a voice to people who've had these experiences and allowing them to tell the story, and then using thematic analysis to analyze their language of how they describe things. So we're going to begin the literature review just by going over, again, some common elements here. We won't go into that many details here, but just so we know what we're kind of dealing with. Went over a few of these earlier, but things like hearing, your death pronouncement. A lot of times people have out-of-body experiences, and they'll see kind of see their body on the operating table or whatever. A lot of times this happens in surgical contexts where people die for momentarily and come back. Out-of-body experiences, people meet dead relatives or spiritual beings. Sometimes they're tailored to a specific religious tradition. Other times it's just kind of a general being, a being of light. Again, the life review, people seeing unnatural environments, things like that. An altered perception of time is also common. And really, these are just two studies that went over common elements, but all the studies really share a lot of common characteristics. And we'll get into some cultural situatedness in these characteristics as well. Another study had NDE near-death experiencers paint their experiences. And this was an interesting study, not necessarily pertinent as much to this specific topic, but it does show that while some people have positive experiences that lead to positive life changes and life outcomes, other people have very dark and distressing experiences that may lead to anxiety, emotional distance, and sort of a negative attitude towards organized religion. Some common benefits of near-death experiences, and obviously these are for people who have survived death and lived to tell the tale. People commonly experience a reduced fear of death, an increased sense of well-being, an increased self-esteem. They appreciate their life more, they have more compassion, they're more selfless, more concerned for others. People who have near-death experiences are better able to cope with grief as a result of their new perspective on death. And there's even another study that I read actually showed that there are benefits for people just learning about near-death experiences, not even experiencing them themselves. So there's a clearly documented pattern of positive life change for the most part for people who had positive experiences. And the overwhelming majority of people who have NDEs have a positive experience. And then back to kind of the subject of NDEs and spirituality. One study I showed was a review of other Eastern near-death experiencers and their specific experiences, and there was a lot of similarities, but also some interesting differences. For example, in a study of Chinese Buddhist monks, no tunnels were seen, which is a common theme of Western NDEs, but the being of light was described. In a study of Indian NDEs, they, instead of having a panoramic life review, had their deeds and misdeeds read by others, which is a common Hindu folk belief. In Thai NDEs, there was some specifically Buddhist beings present. And so there's clearly a sense of religious and cultural situatedness in these experiences, but there are also things that are transcendent across cultures that all experience. And as I mentioned here, I won't really go into too much detail here, but there are various studies that show that near-death experiencers traditionally either reject, not all, but many of them will reject or loosen their traditional religious beliefs and sort of adopt a broad spirituality. And so a lot of times spiritual ideas persist, and there's actually evidence to show that people who were formerly atheists who undergo these experiences will adopt some sort of spirituality, but oftentimes it doesn't result in people adopting or holding on to specific religious traditions. So we already defined a near-death experience. It's going to be helpful to define spirituality. Spirituality can be understood as a search for the sacred, a process through which people seek to discover, hold on to, and when necessary, transform whatever they hold sacred in their lives. So spirituality is much more broad than religion. Religion is much more focused on behavioral, institutional features, specific doctrines, and more historic religious, historic faith systems, where spirituality can be broad. It can pull from a variety of traditions. And so that's kind of what we're talking about when we distinguish between spiritual and religious. So the specific question I'm looking to address is how people who have NDEs describe their religious and or spiritual events after the event. And more specifically, do these people in describing their spiritual and or religious beliefs demonstrate a shift into broader spiritual beliefs rather than traditionally religious ones? And so, as I said, the method for this broadly is going to be a phenomenological approach, which is focused on language and how people describe their experiences. And so to begin, this will be a qualitative study, and the sampling would be done via online advertising, seeking out individuals. These people would need to fill out relevant sociodemographic information, their age when they had the NDE, the time elapsed, and the context. And then we want to determine sort of the validity, or at least rank the NDE based on the Grayson NDE scale, which is a widely used scale for analyzing NDEs. And this is something that will sort of not necessarily validate a person's experience, but let us know where this lies on the range of the intensity of the NDE, because we're looking for people who have what people who study this have quality or term as an NDE, and not just an interesting close to death experience. There's kind of a range there. Also want to determine their level of religiousness prior to and after the NDE using a scale. So the method for data collection will be an interview. The questions will focus specifically on behavior, beliefs, and interest, if any, in spiritual practices and religion and afterlife beliefs. We want to focus on describing the NDE, the post-NDE effects, positive, negative life changes, religious beliefs, prior to and after, description of current beliefs, description and changes in beliefs, the frequency of spiritual experiences and practices, and attitude towards organized religion. These are basically questions that are going to kind of fill in the gaps from what we already basically know with the sociodemographic information and the Grayson NDE scale. When it comes to analyzing the data, as I said, that we're going to be employing a thematic analysis, which seeks to identify, analyze, and report patterns within data, and then develop, organize, and examine themes across the interview transcripts. So it's basically taking all the information that we have and sort of coding it into specific key terms, words, phrases, ideas that appear through a variety of interviews. The method for the thematic analysis will be latent semantic analysis. Just briefly, I don't want to get too in depth on this, but this is just a process that organizes the context of key terms by identifying and mathematically modeling the context in which these terms appear. So it's an automated process that basically allows researchers to codify their data easily using computer algorithms. So it automates the entire process and merges all these transcripts together. And so that way when you want to type in a specific word like religion, you're going to get all the context in which that word appears. And it also helps to sort of draw broad generalizations from the data. A few limitations that I could foresee in the study. The sample, just because of where I'm located, will likely reflect some Western spiritual and religious ideas, and so may not be congruent with how everyone would feel that their NDE has affected them, and it's going to be limited in the sense that everyone's experiences, the after effects will be different for how they experience it. There are a lot of similarities in what the actual experience entails, but the way people process that and the life changes that come from that will vary from person to person. But overall, as a contribution to the field of NDE research, the goal again is just to get more information on how people change their beliefs and just to better understand how these people are processing the NDE. It would provide a systematic list of common themes and ideas, whereas a lot of studies, this is more the idea of and the religious beliefs of NDE near-death experiencers is sort of off to the side and not the focus, and will be useful for analyzing the beliefs of NDEers in the future. And so I hope you enjoyed this brief introduction to the study. There is a wealth of information out there on near-death experiences, but I felt that this particular focus would be of great benefit to the field, and I hope that this particular method of study will be useful in the future to the field, and that it will provide just more general readers with some interesting content and better understanding of how people process these experiences after they've had them. So I thank you for watching, and goodbye.